This is Robert Furman from My Futures Online. Again, I'd like to welcome everybody to this latest installment of the Mastermind Series. David has lined up a very special guest for us today, and look forward to another stellar presentation here with both David and Eric Sprott of Sprott Money. With that, I will go ahead and turn it over to David.
Well, Eric, thank you so much. Appreciate it very much. Just to start off, the number one question that we got from our members here for the premium service was the acquisition of the silver and the silver trust that you started recently. Has it all been delivered at this point in time? And if so, was it easy to acquire that quantity within a reasonable amount of time?
Well, good day, David. Great chatting with you, by the way. And first of all, let me pay you a compliment. I think Dave has been a stalwart in suggesting that people own silver. It's been a phenomenal recommendation for more than a decade. We have been involved in that trade well over 11 years ourselves, and that's the reason we started the Silver Trust, because we think silver will be the investment of this decade, whereas I think gold was the investment of the last decade. We committed to purchase about 20-odd million ounces of silver. We have not received all that silver yet. Probably half of it is not yet here, but it is a very large amount, and we're talking about literally moving tons of material around the world. We are scheduled to receive all of our silver by December 15th. We have particular dates when it's noted as coming, and so far the silver has arrived for the most part on the due dates. I would be concerned if it didn't, but so far everything has worked out as planned.
Well, excellent, and commend you, Ken, on that. Plus, the feature that's different about your trust versus several others is the ability for an investor to actually take the physical, off if they want it, which is extraordinary and very far-sighted in my view. And thank you. I do believe, and this is you, not me, but the decade ahead, I do believe is going to be stronger for silver than gold. And I've been doing that presentation around the world, as you well know, Eric, and we had a one on many. It was you with some of your employees in the money room there. We went through that. Back on point, the second question we got, of course, is one that I kind of grit my teeth on, but it's definitely a part and a big part of the silver market, and that is your comments on a management or manipulation situation. What are your thoughts on that, and how do you think it might be resolved?
Right. Well, that's the $64 million question these days, and David, when I look back to 2008, and I'm sure when you look back to 2008, we suffered egregiously because of the price of silver going from $21 down to, I guess it was 9-something. And it is going to distress me to no end to think that price was manipulated. We've already had the comments from Bart Chilton. We have the 25 lawsuits against J.P. Morgan and HSBC. As you know, the people have been students of this arena for the last 10 years, have always thought that the gold and silver prices were suppressed. There's ample evidence. One of the best, of course, was the study by Adrian Douglas comparing the AM fix in London and the PM fix, and how it was something like 85% of the time the PM fix was always lower than the AM fix, which is almost statistically impossible. So there's been a lot of work done here, particularly by the GATA people, and I think where there's smoke, we'll find out there's fire, particularly when Bart Chilton, who obviously has seen the evidence, has come out and suggest that there seems that there was manipulation. So it's a very distressing thing to imagine having happened, but out of crisis comes opportunity. I think there's a great opportunity for people in the silver market because these shorts have to be covered someday. The amount of metal that they're short is way beyond their ability to deliver. I think this is why silver's done what it's done in the last 3 months, because those parties that were party to the manipulation were probably presented with the evidence 3 months ago. And what are you going to do about it? And I think that's when silver just kind of streaked straight from 18 to 28. So I think everything's will come around for us, because whatever should have happened, of course, is going to happen. It's just that we unfortunately have to have on our records this blight of '08 when we all got unfairly treated with the price of silver getting mauled.
Exactly. Well, thank you, and well said. Another big one, this is sort of a rather deep question, but it's one I get all the time and have thought about constantly, is what's your long-term view on the world economy? And you can subset it into whatever, country or blocks and nations you wish. And what would be silver's role in that global picture going forward?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question because of all the volatility in the financial world these days. I've always believed for the last decade that we've created a financial system that was massively over-leveraged. When you have banks that are levered 20 to 1, therefore you get 5 cents of capital protecting $1 of paper assets, that you have left yourself in a terribly vulnerable situation. And I would use as evidence of that, whenever these bank failures are announced every Friday night, I look at 2 data points, and the first data point is, well, what were their deposits? And 2, what was the cost to the FDIC? And typically, the cost to the FDIC is 25% of their deposits. And knowing that they started with capital of 5%, which is gone, they really lost their capital 6 times over. And that's why I think that the 20 to 1 leverage in the banking system is absolutely preposterous. And if the people who think they're the guardians of the financial world would ever let play out what should play out, in other words, we've never had a liquidation yet because somebody always gets taken over, whether it's AIG or Fannie Mae or a bank who's broke, the FDIC steps in, or the UK banks that got taken over by the UK government, the Irish banks that got taken over by the Irish government. No one ever has to liquidate. But someday that's likely to happen. And what I would say about silver is this, and I'm going to start by making a comment about gold. In my mind, gold is the reserve currency these days. And it's been proven by its performance over the last 10 years, where it's outperformed every currency by 300%, and the stock market by, 500%, whatever the number is. It's shown its true colors. And and I know that silver always was a currency, and it will become a currency again. And I can tell by what's manifesting itself in the silver market today, the people that are buying silver, that there is enough people around to consider silver a currency that it too will become a currency. So that's what I see happening. That gold and silver will again become currency because the fiat money systems aren't to be trusted. So I hope that answers your question as well as it can be answered.
Oh, very succinct. Thank you. We have a question from one of our participants. Are you concerned about the political risk of owning silver mines in any country or countries?
Well, we own precious metal ore bodies all over the world. And, of course, there are different risks in different places. And it's funny, I don't know where your listener's from, but if he's from the United States, I might suggest, well, maybe the U.S. will confiscate the mines, or if he's from Canada, who knows, maybe Canada will confiscate the mines. We all look outside of our own countries and think the risk is incredible. One of the things we do know about all these assets, they're valuable. They're going to keep producing. We have to discount the risk depending on what country it is, and there's certainly some countries we would not own. But knowing that you had to be invested in the precious metals area, you got to go to where the product is. So if you want to own silver, you go to Bolivia and Peru and Canada and the U.S. and wherever there's silver, you don't have too much choice. Mexico, for example. So you discount each of them in some way to represent the degree of risk that you think is appropriate. But if you want to be in the game, you can't have a 100% perfect situation. There's always political risk, no matter where you are.
Very good, then. I agree. I've just stated that we should be diversified globally, which is the best you can, and there are some silver mining companies such as Pan American or Silver Standard where just that one entity basically is covered, pretty much the globe, so it's a pretty safe way to go, obviously. This is kind of coming back to the question you answered just a moment ago, just to drill down a bit deeper, and this is one I constantly get, and that is, if the global system starts to unravel even quicker than it has, and we go into quote-unquote a depression, what will silver's role be in that? And I think you already answered as a currency, a currency of last resort. Do you want to comment any further using the word depression?
Sure. Well, I think in either hyperinflationary situation or even a depressionary type situation, in a depressionary type situation, all banks will fail pretty well. All of them will fail because they're too highly levered. And therefore, having your money in a bank is a very risky position to find yourself in. And that's why owning precious metals is such a valuable and important thing to do, because you can have that product outside of what I'm going to call a counterparty, and a leveraged counterparty. And we've always considered that to be vital in where you invest your money. So, for example, when we set up the physical trust and the physical gold and silver trust, our counterparty is the Royal Canadian Mint, who's not a leveraged financial institution. So we don't have that same degree of risk that the counterparties to the SLV and the GLD might have, HSBC and JP Morgan, the same two people who are being sued for manipulation. So I think that in either scenario, there's a real solid reason for owning precious metals that you can get your hands on.
Okay, very good. Well, I don't know how much more time you have. I've actually not received as many questions as I thought I would from the participants. They're probably a bit in awe of Mr. Eric Sprott being on the line with us. But I would like to go back to your country, to Canada. And let me ask the question again. Do you see in this globally connected financial structure that we have that one area would do better than another? I've thought this through several times, and I really can't make up my mind. What's your thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, I really haven't gone there that much, David. And I'll tell you one of the things that I find interesting as a guy who runs, $5 billion, and I sort of made it my mission to get involved in silver, the commodity and silver stocks. These stocks are tough to buy. I've had more trouble trying to get a position in silver stocks, and as you and your listeners would obviously know, I mean, these silver equities have gone absolutely crazy this year, and they're very difficult to buy. So I don't even have the time to worry specifically, do I just want to go to, Mexico, or just want to go to Peru, or am I going to not go to Bolivia? Because there's so few things to buy, and there's so much money that wants to get in this area, and I think it's just early days in terms of the real money getting in the area. And David, one of my favorite questions when I would go and visit U.S. institutions, and these are, the smartest of the smart. I said, I want to ask if you know three names. And the three names, I said, have you ever heard of Jason Hommel? Have you ever heard of Ted Butler? Have you ever heard of David Morgan? And I would hardly ever got anybody acknowledged. I'm talking institutions now. And I'd say, well, then you don't know anything about the silver business. And most everyone I spoke to didn't know anything about the silver business. And luckily for you, you've been a student of it for a long time, and I'm sure that people who use your service will be well rewarded by listening to your words and the fact that you've been a soldier here for a long time, and I think it's going to be a great decade for us.
Yes, I agree. Well, just to comment on that slightly, my European tour was absolutely amazing. I mean, the amount of people in Geneva, these are fund managers. I mean, these are people that might not be managing $5 billion, but they're managing probably $500 million on up to maybe $1 billion.
Right.
And jam-packed in Geneva. The biggest room in Zurich I have ever seen. Actually had people, and I won't name them, that came up and said to me, geez, I'm really on the silver story. Who cares about gold? A couple of them actually say that to me. We have a couple more real questions, and of course, Eric, we honor your time. If you have to leave, you have to leave. One is, the Russian and Chinese, our central banks are absorbing all of their country's gold production. Are there other institutions absorbing gold? How much is available of the 75 million annual production?
Yeah, I don't really know the answer to that, because obviously it's not that transparent what happens. I mean, I always find it so encouraging that Russia comes out every month and announces what they buy. And quite frankly, they're probably buying as much as the IMF's almost selling. I don't really know what other people are doing. We started our gold trust and we bought $1 billion worth of gold this year. I haven't heard a lot of new names in the gold area in terms of the institutional ownerships of the likes of Paulson and Soros and so on. But I can tell you, and you would know this, that, mint sales are booming. Certainly the purchases of the iShares Silver Trust have been astounding in the last 50 days. In fact, I sort of wonder where they presumably added 50 million ounces of silver in the last 2 months. And I don't know where they're getting it from. So the word's getting out there. I'm glad to see you had such a great reception in Europe. I found that the awareness of silver in North America is not that astute yet. Maybe the Europeans have a big leg up on us.
Well, I would comment on that the Germans definitely, the Swiss, it's hard to read in my opinion, but I did meet with one of the fund managers of the Zurich Continental Bank, and I have to say his thinking was very close to mine, and silver bull all the way. And as you said at the beginning of this presentation, looking at the next decade is silver's decade. The previous decade was gold's decade. I'll just ditto that and say that was his sentiment as well. A very good student of the silver market. I do have a question here that I think I'll answer first, Eric, and then you can comment on it if you want. It comes from one of our members. In a parabolic situation, if one wanted to unload physical, what are the options in what would be a chaotic environment? Assume that my supplier has a buyback policy. However, what if he cannot be reached or won't honor the buyback commitment? Other possible solutions. I've thought of this because I was in the first bull market, and all the dealers in Los Angeles bid back from the $50 price on the futures exchange down to $35. So if you were selling on the exact day of the peak, which was a one-day event, by the way, and you happen to be in line with your candlesticks or your bag of junk or whatever, silver, you were getting $35 the ounce.
Right.
The only way at that time to get the 50 was to hedge in the futures market.
Right.
But this time there's lots of more availability. In other words, you would have the SLV you could short a mining company, a top tier one like a Pan American. You have futures and options, of course. There are all kinds of ETFs. There's double shorts. There's all kinds of ways you could hedge. So if your broker wasn't picking up the phone, you wouldn't have to panic. You could just basically log into your account and you could hedge yourself up that way.
Right.
I'm not too certain that in this environment this time around that they're going to bid back like they did in 1980. That's an assumption that none of us can make at this point. In fact, with the shortage of silver that I see coming up over the next couple of years, and those that know the study I did know that we're going to probably be back in a deficit in about 2 to 3 years.
Right.
So I'm not that concerned about it. Eric, would you like to comment further on that?
Well, Dave, I've never really worried much about it because I think if you imagine that silver and gold become reserve currencies, you don't need to trade them in. I always debate, well, what would I ever trade it in for? What am I going to buy with this silver I'm going to sell? And until other things become just excruciatingly obvious values vis-a-vis precious metals, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. This market for precious metals is so much bigger than it was in 1980. And as you say, the vehicles available are widespread. So, if, for example, let's say we're long $500 million worth of silver and we phone up the domestic banks that sold it to us and they say they don't have a bid, but I really want to get off it, well, fine, maybe I could go short the iShares Silver Trust or do some other transaction of that ilk to cover myself in the meantime before I had a physical buyer. But it's not something I really want to contemplate yet because I think it's way early days. As if we both think it's the investment of the decade, I don't think we have to learn to worry about it for the next 8.5 years.
Well, great, excellent answer, and I concur with that. This will be our last question. I know you've got to go, but the early days of the last bull market, I guess the silver guru in those days was named Jerome Smith. And he talked about in one of his first books about in ancient Egypt that silver was worth about 1/5 the price of gold. There's a Dr. Green that actually wrote out of the UK of lost contact with that said that they were par in Egypt. I don't think anyone knows. All they're suggesting is that silver was valued much higher relative to gold than it is today. And Jerome actually went as far as to say that he thought that the silver-gold ratio could get down into the 5-to-1 ratio, maybe even par at some time. I won't go that far. I've said 10 to 1, but no one knows. What do you think about the gold-silver ratio over the next decade?
This is a great question, David, and it's the most important question that can be asked about silver. And the reason I think it will be the investment of the decade, and I love gold, is because I think the price of gold is going up, but I think that ratio of gold to silver will go from 50 to 1, where it is today, down back to the more normal 16 to 1, and it may overshoot on the downside. And when I look at the flow of monies that I can analyze every day going into the silver and gold market, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind it's going to happen. And maybe I'll just leave one thought with your listeners as a relative way of looking at it. The amount of money in the SLV is $9 billion, and the amount of money in the GLD is under $60 billion. So we're at about a 6-to-1 ratio of people putting money into those two vehicles in terms of the silver-gold ratio. Well, we can't all keep doing that with the price being 50 to 1. That's why it will break lower. I don't know how fast it's going to happen. I'm sure if you and I are chatting here at the end of this next decade, I'm sure it'll be 16 to 1 or lower.
Very good. All right. Well, Eric, as always, it was a pleasure to meet you again in your office with all your beautiful artwork, by the way, and thank you for treating me so wonderfully. It's always a pleasure. I, again, honor your time. I thank you on the behalf of all of our premium members. Hopefully we can do this again maybe in another year or so, and as you know, we'll keep in touch, so thank you very much.
Okay, Dave, you keep up the good work. I mean, you've done yeoman's work for a long time, but is it ever paying off these days? So congratulations to you and your listeners.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Buy real, get real, be real.